kind of it was like a calling song. And I never, one of the things that I regret is that I don't, I didn't write down the name, or I don't remember the name, but it was a kind of like, you know, calling in something good, calling in a, a gift, or something that was going to be of use to the community. Because they, of course, knew that we were trying to negotiate an entry to that camp. But I just remember this feeling of, there was a tangible quality to the music, and it was kind of a characteristic of the group that we ended up being able to move into, in that everything was done in that very kind of collective, dynamic, musical atmosphere. You know, there was a feeling that the people were continually using the whole body and the voice to make a statement about, you know, the kind of society that they were, and what they valued, and the fact that, you know, the first night that we were in the camp, they danced Ejenge, and just there are a lot of connections that I think get left out of the final sort of academic piece, and that I would like to look at more closely in the context of what I'm saying about power. I mean, the fact that that first night as well, the two older women, the two eldest women, seemed to be controlling Ejenge. And again, you know, really, really physical, really, you know, everything being stamped out, everything being kind of pushed into the most public domain by women, physically, you know, interlinked. And the fact that, you know, when one woman danced, there were always a few others at her back. Or if a young woman started up a song, there would instantly be 10 others there. You can feel a different understanding and use of the body at play, you know, from the moment you enter that kind of community.
So, but Ejenge is the men's ritual, and you're saying these ladies, these women had a control over that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the things that I most clearly took note of, because I had read, you know, I've read a lot Jerome's descriptions of Ejenge, and I know it wasn't like a sustained 2-3 day Ejenge. It was being performed because we were there in camp for the first night. But the fact that these two, it was actually the two eldest women who called Ejenge in and then kind of controlled him while he was dancing.
Spirit, yeah.
Helped by a lot of the male dancers.
That's very interesting, because I've been in a camp with the Hadza where it has been the older women who actually were holding ephemer instruments and so forth. And of course, Ejenge and ephemer, the Hadza ritual, were both supposed to belong to women originally.
Yeah, it's very, very, very interesting to watch how, you know, they really are like the power source. These elder women, they're kind of scary, you know, whenever when they assert themselves like that, when they dance like that, and they have a lot, you can tell they have a lot of power by the way they conduct themselves. But the fact then that it's kind of like what's really interesting is that, and this is also kind of thinking about the power, Camilla, in the way that I'm thinking about it now, is the fact that it's never allowed to stop. So there's almost never a moment where this is dropped. Like you have the big ritual moments or the dance moments where people are really mobilized, and you have the elder women controlling things. But even through the night, I remember lying, you know, in desperation, trying to get to sleep, because there was always somebody a few people just holding it, just keeping things going. There was always this buzz of, there was, you know, a few lines of song being sung, a wee bit of drumming. And that's my memory of being at Mbula, is that there were very few times, maybe around noon and through the early part of the afternoon, things got quiet. Otherwise, it's not just motion, it's also, it's like the voice in motion as well as the body. It's like keeping this charge going all the time in the social kind of ritual space.
You've talked about the body a lot, but not specifically Eros. And your paper was The Politics of Eros.
Yeah.
And what's most difficult for people in the West to understand is that women can have power through being erotic. I mean,
well, you know, Chris, I think you're. Yeah, Eros. You see, this is what is interesting. Eros is not really in its old classical sense. It's not just the erotic, because we can get lost in this. You know, that it's about being sexy. It's about being erotic. That is very much part of a constellation. I mean, you know, giving birth is erotic. You know, dancing with your friends is erotic. You know, it's kind of like it's embedded in a much deeper understanding of the erotic, of what Eros is. And actually, Barbara Ehrenreich talks about this. She says, we do with erotic what we do with everything else. We isolate it, we privatize it, and we pull it back to the individual woman's body, which then, you know, is an object of desire. She says Eros in many cultures and in the old sense is closer to how Jerome talks about this actually. It's about feeling fantastic together. It's about the sensual connection, the sensuous connection that is made, and the fact that it's not about the pair bond. It's not about romance. Although it's, you know, that's there, that the desire and attraction is very powerful, you know, in these cultures, but it's taken out of its individual or you know, dual frame and set into a collective frame. I mean, I think that the level of charge that you feel from those women, it's as much about collective desire, and it's as much about the fact that the female body has achieved this powerful, collective, attractive voice. It just feels like, and I said that actually in the paper. Eros is to do with laughter. It's to do with joy. It's to do with sex. It's to do with desire. But it's not just, you know, confined to being sexy. That really doesn't do it justice.
But it doesn't exclude that either. I mean, that's the point. It's all these separations that we have in the West just themselves the root of the oppression, of course. Yeah.
Well, they've been defined for a long time by a grammar that didn't arise out of the female body. When you talk about patriarchy, you're talking about a whole different language, and I think you start to hear a different language when you're looking at what comes from the female body, as it has a voice and a shape and culture. You know, it's a very different thing.
Yeah.
Morna, can I ask about your description, corporeal morality, and how you contrast that? So you're talking about morality arising from literally the skin, from contact, from the experience of the body, shared experience, contrasted to what you call command and control. So one is about this yearning and desire, and the other is about kind of punishment. Do you want to say more on that?
Yeah, I mean that again. It's. I feel like I've been looking at power from different angles for a long time, and that this is another kind of avenue, is understanding how morality works in societies that aren't based on command and control. So punitive, kind of fenced types of morality that have to be inflicted from the outside. I think things like Aquila, Nom, are really, really fascinating cultural centers for looking at morality, because of course what they do is they place morality in the body, and actually right around that kind of core reproductive center in the solar plexus. So in the womb area is where morality is lodged. The cosmology, the kind of the philosophy nearly of morality is there. But you can't if you look at Nom, if you look at Aquila, it can't be activated alone. You can't, it's what I was saying at the start about power. You can't use it for yourself. It's useless if you try to use it only for yourself. And there are stories from the Juntois about dancers who try to use their nom for their own benefit and end up kind of getting very much marginalized by the rest of the community. Aquila there's so much integrity in these corporeal terms. You know, they've come right out of the body, but they're full of integrity because you can't privatize them.
Perhaps just remind everybody, because some people might not know, that Aquila is this very, very wonderful and amazing central concept of the Vangeli, which connects the blood of the womb, menstrual blood, the blood of game animals with the moon, and conservation and well-being and fertility. It's a concept which you can't imagine having in the West, you know, because obviously over here the moon is a bit suspect. It's probably moonshine, and menstrual blood, you're not even allowed to talk about it. And so perhaps just
Nom and Epime with the Hadza, they're words that are untranslatable and that have a lot of range of meaning. They really encompass the whole cosmos. But as Morna, I think it's such an amazing suggestion Morna makes, that they have this root in the body, and they are rooted in this feeling. And above all, it's the question of sharing that feeling, of visceral, what Morna expresses, this visceral intersubjective experience shared together is the root and the basis of morality, and the root of understanding all this range of meanings that become apparent to people.
The concept you use, Morna, is the articulate body. The women's body is a collective body which has a voice and is very, very, very articulate.
And that expression comes from who? Who do you link that to?
From who do I link the articulate body to?
I mean, the historian, or whatever you call it.
Sorry, you're breaking up, Camilla, say it again.
Sorry, I'm just referring, so people get it, the articulate body is coming from Bakhtin, and that that whole idea that laughter is the kind of source. So we're getting an idea that laughter itself is the source for morality itself.
Absolutely, Bakhtin is really. I mean, I remember when the paper was going to the JRAI, one of the reviewers suggested taking Bakhtin out, and
no.
And was he? I don't know. I obviously they were anonymous. I have this reviewer in mind as a he, was saying, well, this isn't relevant to the hunter-gatherer ethnography. It's just a random kind of reference that you could do without. And my argument was that really we needed Bakhtin's ideas to fully understand the massive political, philosophical, historical, implications of this way of being the body. And he just talks so beautifully about the great generic body of the people, and the fact that it was expressed through laughter, through irreverence, through stamping through the public space, being body, being connected, being explicit, sexually explicit. You would have the hag mother who was, leaking milk and had death pouring out of her, and
it wasn't just any old part of the body. It wasn't your forehead so much. It was the lower bodily stratum, which is the source of all the laughter. Your ass and your belly, your tits, and your everything. That's when those things are collectivized. They've got such a powerful subversive voice, turning the world upside down.
Yeah, I mean, also if you think about Bakhtin and this lower bodily stratum, and then you think about the Benjeli women's lyrics when they're really kind of taking control, and the language is so graphic, it's so earthy, and it's really like the words of these songs are saying things like, the penis gives birth to nothing, it's no competition, it died already, the vagina wins, and these are at the very heart of the public cultural domain. So it is very much Bakhtin, really, but organically happening and real, because Bakhtin was reflecting on those cultures after they had already been annihilated by this very kind of heavy, the imposed morality, the control and command system had already been able to silence that body. But to find it happening in Mbule and then to not use the insights that Bakhtin brings to this would have been nuts. We have to have eloquent theoretical frames for this stuff, compelling ways to look at it. Also because for us, I think for us as in people raised in these kinds of cultures, you need a way to understand how the alternative operates. The Benjeli speak for themselves, but we need the tools to
Just to say briefly, Jerome and I are writing a book. It's called When Eve Laughed, The Origin of Laughter. And we were both totally convinced that Mwajo, the Benjeli women's rival performance to take the piss out of some idiotic, usually guy that's been throwing his weight around and being a complete idiot, that kind of laughter is the first word when now that laughter breaks out, and it's gesticulated and expressed without words, but it's mostly laughter, that collective voice. If you want to know what the first word ever spoken in human language was, it was that belly laugh. So I mean, fantastic. Yeah.
It's so interesting because I just finished a book, totally going off the down a different road here, but I just finished a book called Cave in the Snow by Tenzin Palmo, who's a Buddhist nun, about her experience, of she went and retreat into a cave for 13 years. And she's a fascinating woman, really, really fascinating. But one of the things that she committed herself to, she said, having understood a lot of the Buddhist, history and tradition, and having committed her life to Buddhism, she came up with a statement. She said, "I'm going to achieve enlightenment as a woman, in the body of a woman, because this is where we bring our riches, into all areas." For her, it was the spiritual, but I mean the cultural, the political, the social, education, to bring the language of the collective female body out of that individual biological framework and place it in a collective framework just kind of explodes a lot of the assumptions that people live with about what's possible for us as humans. Yeah. I was also thinking about, I guess, I mean, going back to things like Aquila and Nom, and the ways that we can understand what's happening in these kinds of society. I think it's also really important not to lose the really detailed ethnographic, information that comes through in things like Aquila and Nom, the step-by-step process of how these things are employed, the graphics almost of the rituals as they're used, going back and forth all the time between the really intricate ethnographic detail and what it gives you, and the theory and the reflections on other kinds of society.
Do you want to give us a taste of that detail in connection with Aquila? Maybe not everyone here in this.
Not everyone will be familiar with the terms, so expand a little, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of well, I mean, in terms of things like Aquila or Nom, actually, there's this weaving together of female reproductive fluids and the body with male labor, male kind of biological concerns. So, you have controls around menstrual blood as one of the big kind of Aquila signals that are linked to hunting luck and linked to game blood, linked to pregnancy and childbirth, but also linked to, from what I understand from Jerome's work, especially where he writes about older people cultivating their Aquila, it's also linked to energetic power, dancing power, the ability to communicate with spirits, to become a combeti, to be able to be articulate ritually. So all of these things, male, female bodies on the reproductive level are being woven into the whole kind of ritual, spiritual domain.
When Jerome asked one of his friends about Aquila, the answer was, well, it's about woman's biggest husband, and woman's biggest husband is the moon, and the moon gives, the moon's blood in you is that source of Aquila, and of course the moon waxes and wanes, and it has this period, this, as you call it, flux and periodicity, and so the power comes and it goes, comes and it goes. So
Yeah.
Wonderful stuff.
I mean, dialogism is another concept of Bakhtin's, and you see that so clearly there as well, where different bodies, you know, are being used to work, almost to work against each other to create energy, to create the motion of this pendulum. That's another thing that's really interesting, and you see that with Aquila too. The fact that there's women's Aquila, there's men's Aquila. You know, just like there are women's spirits, women's songs, men's spirits, men's songs, but these things are always working on each other and kind of moving through each other and creating this energy, this what the Juntois call heat. You know, the ideal is to, it's almost, you think of quantum physics nearly, things having to work on each other in this very controlled ritual way, so that they can move past dualism, move into something. And the descriptions from, especially a lot of the Japanese ethnographers, and things that I witnessed, like Bibuja, the dance for joy, eventually at a certain point you have this working on each other kind of almost aggressively, and then it all moves out into, you know, euphoria, a feeling of intoxication, this sense of people feeling really good about themselves. I was looking back over the article as well, and the terms that Michelle Kisluk uses when she talks about women's dances are all, you know, euphoria, intoxication, enchantment, beauty, joy, and the language is very much to do with feeling good, people feeling really connected. And I think that is really the key thing, because if you get stuck in duality, if you get stuck in, okay, you know, women are powerful because they're women, they're very much, you know, using their bodies to assert power. You have to also take the next step into the collective ritual domain, where the work that's done creates something that takes people beyond, you know, even sex, individual, the individual biological body.
I was just going to say,
it's really an incredible virtuous system.
I wanted to say that I can see, I don't know whether they want to join in, but I can see Jerome here somewhere. Ingrid here somewhere. I'm not sure if they want to amplify.
Or anybody would like to ask questions.
Yeah, of course, yeah. But Jerome or Ingrid, if you're there, if you want to add anything. I think maybe they're not.
No, well, we are here. And
you are there, yeah.
Very nice to see everybody. I think we should let the discussion move a bit forward.
Okay.
And let other people have a word.
I can't. I can only see a few of you. But.
I can see Sam.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, because in your 2018 presentation on the Tarag, on the I think you're talking to your PhD, and then in your JRA article you didn't touch on the subject of I suppose the establishment of governance and society. You talked about sort of Hobbes, and then you talked about hierarchy and what we're living in now, and then you talked about obviously the idea of what you're talking about now is the idea of this energy. It's almost like a ball of energy touching your solar plexus, but you can tell it's sort of around everywhere, and we each have a part of it. And then you sort of briefly mentioned natural law, and I just did a quick Google search for natural law on Wikipedia, and it says it's the sort of foundation of the Enlightenment, trying to get away from the divine rights of kings. But the history goes back to sort of Greek society and Roman society. Is there, because you said it was sort of the someone has to reason and determine what natural law is, because couldn't we say that in terms of what Chris's theory is talking about, in terms of how we became human, in terms of women's power, that women said this isn't natural, this is the natural law, and this is how we establish it? Because you seem to be sort of making a distinction between natural law and what you're talking about in terms of just waking up every day. You know, we have to make society every single day. Women have to do their songs in parallel lines, saying denigrating male genitalia, and the men have to sort of fight back a bit. You're sort of making a distinction between what a natural law is, between what you're talking about. So why did you sort of disagree with the natural law element, or have you done much research into that? What I'm saying, or?
Not really. I mean, what I was really looking at, I was trying to separate out the understanding of, you know, Hobbes's understanding of law and power and how a society can function, and comparing it kind of more with the Rousseauian model, you know, where you have cooperation and negotiation, dialogism, as opposed to the kind of monologic system. I think, I mean, we can talk about law. It's an interesting idea to place in the context of these kinds of societies, gender egalitarian societies. But what I was saying about the fact that things are very much centered in the body and held in the body. Also, I mean, Jerome has talked about this this understanding of how law or morality, shared ethics operates through the mnemonics, you know, of the body itself. The mnemonic devices are things like menstrual blood and you know, semen and milk and you know, the moon, game blood. They're very elemental, earthy devices, and sometimes I think if we lean too much on the idea of law, you lose that kind of sense of the way things are being held in, coming out of and returning to the body all the time. But more than anything, what I wanted to do by looking back at the idea of law that Hobbes introduces was to compare it with what we're seeing here, rather than getting, you know, going into a deep analysis of the kind of legal system, the kind of authority framework Hobbes spoke about and that was later developed, to look at how people like the Bengeli or the Juntois almost go in another direction.
Well, can laughter lay down the law, in fact, because it's not something incorporated in texts or put into legal statutes, but laughter can operate to create a kind of law in these societies.
Yeah, and also it's for a long time I think I was really missing the fact that, yeah, Camilla, laughter seems to be central. I mean, laughter is like a loosener anyway, but also things, you know, that you don't hear so much about. when we're talking about how a society might regulate itself and function, like, you know, laughter, beauty, happiness, joy, you know, that these things could become principles that also have a direct impact on people's willingness to participate in the group, and willingness, for example, to engage in these ritual repartees that gives such a presence and a voice to the female body.
I remember reading particularly from Dasha Bombiakova's thesis about Masana, which obviously Jerome knows and Ingrid knows so much about, and this incredibly positive value that everybody would take part in Masana, which is again one of these so difficult to translate terms of collaborative play that can go from children's games all the way to spirit plays and rituals. But it's it's that expression of joy that the people are going to share that joy, and that there's such a strong value that they will participate in that. Maybe Jerome and Ingrid can say more.
In the meantime, just in the meantime, I've just got a message from my daughter, and she's just sharing this around. As men are more vulnerable to COVID-19, has anyone considered allowing women and children out of lockdown first? We could run the country for a few weeks and see how things go while men stay at home baking banana bread and clapping.
Particularly older white men, maybe. I don't know.
That might work, yeah.
Not in lockdown.
Questions from people joining in, because there must be some, you know, people must be finding some of this quite amazing material in terms of its presentation and the emphases on how women get power. How is that expressed? What can we learn out of it? What can we get from it? Anybody?
Hi, yeah. I had a question. So I am Nafisa. I'm very interested in like theatre, so I was very intrigued by the use of carnivalesque and this theatrical theory, and pushing more towards playing on the word play. And I was kind of interested in what you might think about the ways in which we interpret drama and theatre in the West include dress. So I don't know very much about the subject, but I was kind of interested in what you might think about, or what you had to say, ethnographically speaking, about the way that dress translates into morality. You mentioned kind of briefly that men wore skirts, women wear skirts in this community, kind of how that feeds into the ritualistic elements of the whole, of the society as a whole, how dress feeds into those elements. I was kind of interested if there was anything to say about that.
So how people's dress is relevant to ritual, or to the egalitarian ethos, you mean?
Yeah, kind of how it feeds into rituals, and as well as gender, and kind of talking about this corporeal morality, kind of elements of nakedness, perhaps. I don't know much about this particular group of people, but I would imagine that there's kind of a different than we have in the West, different ideas about modesty, about shame, about body parts on show and the public and in the public domain. So I'm kind of wondering more about that, perhaps.
What's happened?
Yeah, my first thought is that can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can.
Okay. My first thought is probably that Jerome and Ingrid would give you a fuller answer to the question of clothes, maybe clothes that are appropriate for, particularly like I'm thinking of ritual clothes, ritual costume or masking.
Just to say, Camilla's posted on
Yeah.
Facebook your photograph, and
Yeah.
it was taken down on the basis that it was pornography.
I used one of the very beautiful photos you took at Mbulu of the collective group, where some of the women were topless, obviously, as per normal, and there were women with babies at the breast and so on. But of course, Facebook, exemplifying a command and control patriarchal morality or policing, said you can't use that photo, take it away. So I fooled Facebook and put it up anyway, but it was just a beautiful, ironic example of the difference between a corporeal morality where people have skin-to-skin contact and feeling each other all the time,
Right.
compared to whatever Facebook represents.
So I could just perhaps add a little bit. I
thought it was really interesting at Mbula that.
Go Morna.
Go Morna.
Jerome is saying, "Go for it, Morna."
Go Morna and then Jerome.
Shall I go ahead?
Yes,
Yeah.
No, I was just going to say.
Go on.
I'm hearing loads of feedback. I don't know if other people are getting that too.
Yeah.
Maybe.
I find it really interesting that at Mbula, the traditional dress was all.
Why do you keep stopping? Are you hearing things we can't hear?
If everybody mutes
Can
themselves.
you hear me, Camilla?
All right.
Yes, I can. Yeah, but mute if mute.
I'm going to mute myself.
So the fact that it was definitely women who were insisting on not covering up because we were there, and I think when you come into a community for the first time, you create a certain amount of formality, and the fact that they were quite assertive about, coming forwards to us, and also not like a lot of the younger guys put on t-shirts and whatever collection of jeans or shorts they had, but the girls and the women didn't, and were seemed to form the kind of the core, the cultural core in terms of representing, themselves physically. I don't know if that makes sense. I think you have to go back to an understanding, like Camilla says, of contact, skin contact being really fundamental, and the fact that there's no shame in particularly exposing breasts, because they're, as much as anything, you need to be able to feed a baby at short notice, and there's an assertion made about the fact that if you are breastfeeding, if you are lactating, you're beautiful, you're fertile, and your body is something that is powerful. So I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, sorry, thank you. It really does. Thanks.
Well, I think there's some interesting points you've raised there, and the question of nudity is something which people like Bambangele are criticized by their neighbors, and it forms part of the sort of classic insults that they receive, that they walk around naked, that people don't know how to wear clothes properly, that they're somehow disrespectful to others by not wearing clothes when they appear in villages and other places like that. And so these kinds of attitudes over time, when they're drummed into you again and again, have made some people feel more embarrassed is not the right word, but conscious of their nudity, perhaps. And so people do put clothes on when they're, particularly when they're going to below their neighbors' places. But within the forest space that people inhabit, nudity is encouraged. It's something which, I mean, it's not nudity in the sense of taking all your clothes off. People keep a cash sex, a loincloth on. And in Ethiopia, for instance, where I was working, people were genuinely nude there, and they thought that wearing clothes was a sign of weakness. So it was a very different attitude, that you're somehow ashamed of your body if you're wearing clothes, and you shouldn't be ashamed of your body. But in the Bengele case, they even have a verb for mixing up your bodies, bosanganyenjo, which really refers to the business of how you sit with others and how you share space with others. And it's quite interesting seeing everyone on the Zoom here, all in their separate little pods, and not even, I mean, no touching possible, of course, but not even any melting blending of images. So we're all separate, and this is something that Bengele really think of as somehow unhealthy. So I'm just going to join the pod, and so what it really is about is this resting your body against those who are near you. And it's not a resting which is, imposing. It's a resting which is about sharing that physicality. And there's a really strong bonding which happens when you regularly share skin touch with people. And of course, this is not sexualized. This is just about feeling comfortable. It's about feeling the sense of the warmth, the physical warmth of people around you. There's a very sweet study done by Barry Hewlett, which I have no idea how he told me how he did it, but anyway. So he asked people to get on the bed that they slept in and show him how they had been sleeping. And he was comparing the amount of square meters that an individual requires to sleep. And it turns out that the relatives of the Bengele in the north that he studied, each individual occupies about 0.4 of a meter squared when they go to sleep. What that means is that people are lying in great piles of bodies, mixing their legs up and their arms up and just sprawling across one another in a very intimate sense of closeness with those around them. And I think it really, illustrates very well this importance of keeping that skin contact going, the endorphins it produces. Anyone who's been through the blessing of giving birth will now be told to make sure they have skin contact with the baby as soon as it comes out. And these really are very important parts of how human beings build love. Love is a chemical process as well as an affective process. And there are some very core physical practices we could all do, and they increase our feelings of affection, of care, of love for others.
And just to add to that, perhaps it kind of feeds into this idea of Eros that we've created in modern society, which naturally links the erotic to the pornographic and makes it difficult for us to kind of imagine, someone that you might hug with clothes on. If you see them at the beach in a bikini, it would be, absurd to put your chest against theirs. And this idea that our clothes form this layer of modesty rather than, being something, or intimacy being a feeling which can be extended from skin to skin contact. And I think that's something that we've definitely lost more in a Western society, westernized kind of, closed, there's modesty kind of society. We don't understand perhaps as well the idea that intimacy can be physical intimacy can be non-pornographic, can be non-sexual, can be about emotional desire, right? Or I'm just wondering if that rings true, perhaps.
Yes, I think it really does. I mean, that's the heart of it, and it is a tragedy, really, that we've so sexualized human bodies that we can no longer, in a sort of comforting and comfortable way, share that kind of contact with the people that we care about. Or we can, but of course it starts getting misinterpreted easily and not understood.
I wonder if that's because also because we're not connected in the way that say the Benjeli are. The fact that the loss of connection and the focus on separation, the focus on people being kind of individuals, individual egos with a whole array of things closing them off or shutting them down. It's like what Barbara Ehrenreich says. You lose not only the connection, but you lose this general kind of sensual, malleable thing that happens whenever you have routine contact. I mean, I think the fact that when people move together constantly with skin contact, constantly touching one another, it's like you said, Jerome. It's the almost like the chemistry of egalitarianism. The ability to share, the ability to trust changes. It's not intellectual. It's not theoretical. It's not even political. It's really, a kind of physical, chemical, organic process to feel that level of connection. If you think about the fact that it's things now we're moving into this virtual kind of existence, it's been increased by the current situation, but I've been saying it for a long time. This idea that we're connecting using virtual media, and it seems that people are more and more disconnected, more and more uncomfortable with each other physically. There are ways that this stuff can be used that are useful, but it just seems to be part of a step further back from really kind of deep physical, sensual, chemical connection that we need, because we have however many hundreds of thousands of years of evolutionary precedent to it, and it's all the things that I value culturally come out of that. They come out of those kinds of really deep visceral connections, blood connections, earth connections that Zoom just doesn't do.
But my daughter was just mentioning another thing, which is that when the government said you're only allowed to go take exercise once a day, I mean, obviously, when you're told you're only allowed once a day, I mean, a lot of people think, I was going to sneak in another day, another few hours of exercise. So there's far more people sneaking around trying to get into the park, and they're probably normal. And it could, and with any luck, having been told, obviously, understandably, that we mustn't hug each other and all that stuff, maybe it will be a huge thirst to get really tactile with each other once we're free of this very, very strange moment of lockdown. I mean, let's hope that we really appreciate tactile affection now that we've been denied it for so long, and really appreciate being out and doing real things with the birds and the bees and the squirrels and the trees. After having been told we're only allowed to do it in little short spells.
So social distancing, unfortunately, feeds into a kind of command and control authoritarian hierarchy.
Of course it does, yeah.
It enables it terribly. So we've really got to summon a resistance to and feel like rebels against it in some sense. Obviously, though, without endangering ourselves. And so, how do we do that? How do we create this movement? Because I was thinking, I was talking to a friend today on email, Jonathan. I don't think he could come in today, which was sad. And I sent him your beautiful old paper from Oxford, Morna, Corporeal Morality. And he was talking about what are we going to do to resist and build the better world? And I was thinking of the NHS now is almost a collectivized female, pan-ethnic, comes from all four quarters of the world body, which of course the ruling class is currently cutting off bleeding chunks to privatize it. So we've got this battle of privatization versus a real collectivized, and in some ways the NHS is one, it's never been more under attack, but also it's never been more powerful symbolically as this collective. And of course it's not totally female, but it has a female bodily aspect to it. I don't know.
We got Danny here as well.
Yeah, we've got NHS workers here. No?
Some workers. Yeah, I don't know if they want to.
No, I'm not saying everybody's female, but it's got a.
So Danny told us last week that he was working in a matriarchy. So I don't know if you want to expand on that, Danny. You'll have to unmute.
Anybody.
Unmute.
I'm just working with women who find me ridiculous at times. If that's what you mean.
Well, wasn't quite what I meant, but
I think if I might add something to that, just the idea of the NHS as a symbolically female body. Obviously, the NHS's main reason for existing is care, and care is often associated with female bodies and the matriarchy. And yeah, I do often think of the NHS as kind of a female thing. And even though obviously many people associate the profession of medicine and being a doctor or a medical professional or a healthcare professional with kind of masculine roles of power, the NHS as a body, as a collective organization, is almost, it kind of reminds me, or sits in the same place in my mind. It's like, like a mummy group, like, where you go, kind of a non-transphobic mum's net of care extending into the world, which is kind of where it sits in my mind. And so I wonder if there's any power to that symbolically, considering the NHS female in that way, and the idea that it's a caregiver.
I talk a lot to parents because I'm a key worker but in education, and I get a lot. I have one parent who just goes on and on and on about how great the NHS are and how people will suddenly, appreciate all these key workers and see it as, but this is really what society is. It's just like this caring, these helping people. It'd be great if that happened. That suddenly the feminine, if NHS is like the feminine, if it's like venerated at that point, and then we have this kind of surge of connectivity, that'd be great.
Yeah, I think so.
Danny, do you want to?
My experience of the NHS, it's more like the army. It's very hierarchical, and I think probably the modern NHS grew up in the context of, think about Florence Nightingale and the Crimean War and things like that. So there's a tension. I think it's maybe the reason why it's so hierarchical and so controlled is because it's by and large female, dominated in numbers, but controlled. So NHS staff are generally friendly people and caring people and people who like to party like everybody else. But the NHS culture, it's very, very controlled, very hierarchical.
Right.
But all the nurses and doctors who clap and applaud, you know, somebody who's managed to come out of, you know, intensive care on a ventilator and he's alive. I mean, it might be controlled, but it's genuine, isn't it? I mean, the feelings are just, you feel like crying. I mean, it's just such an enormous upwelling of emotion and pride that a life has been returned, you know, and it just, that is a good example of ritual that's actually getting into the NHS. And once it starts, these kind of rituals, you know, we have a sort of potential for it to go a little bit further. These, I mean, you know, there's something a little bit weak about just clapping and so on, but compared with what the Benjelli get up to, but it's a beginning, isn't it? Or it could be.
And I think there is that tension between the NHS as a sort of bureaucracy, a hierarchy, and the fact that care, life and death are such emotional and intrinsically human feelings. It's not, you know, when you send someone into the hospital, of course, from the perspective of the healthcare professional, there are tick boxes, but also there is the sense that you're holding someone's life in your hand. And that is deeply emotional and deeply physical, you know, the way that someone, you know, if you find out of family members in hospital, you feel like you're keeling over. And I think there is something to that, like you said, Danny, about the tension within the NHS, because the people who work in the NHS are human and they have to feel this sense of life and death, but also compartmentalize in order to do their job and to make it possible. I wonder if there is some way of kind of harmonizing the two, and maybe clapping for the NHS is one of those ways in which we're trying to embody the emotional ritual into, you know, the institutional, the organized, the bureaucratized.
I heard Dominic Raab actually saying today, talking about essential workers, the NHS, but also delivery drivers, supermarket workers, cleaners, that we have to do some levelling up. So that was a Tory saying this. So it's about some kind of collective defence of principles of egalitarianism. So yes, there's this tension, but somehow all these workers that have taken on board so much risk and so much stress and so much hardship must get real rewards. There really must be some levelling up, and we've kind of got to hold these Tory bastards to account. So well, what do we? It isn't just something we're going to sit back and watch. I hope it's something we've got to be very active about. Very active. When people feel that the nurses can go back to their meager wages and they've done their stuff, and quite a lot of them actually died.
I can see Jacob's got your hand up. You have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's beautiful about this event is that it's bringing us back into our bodies in a very real way, which is calling into the tension between business, capitalism, economics, and life, the force of life and health, and the tension. And the dialogue is, do we open up, do we go back to normal, or do we stay in the body and put life first? In terms of the ritual of the duality of gender, you mentioned in the paper the fluidity and multiplicity of Mbati, that they're stepping away from a fluidity into a rigid genderization, and then going back into, like, the ritual is very binary, and then it seems to release back into something else. And for us, what that something else is law, is money, is control and command. So my curiosity is, what do their rituals release into that might be a lesson for us now?
So from when people are engaged in these rituals that are kind of confrontational and building momentum, building heat, building energy. I mean, one of the things that is really interesting to me is that in everyday life, there's such a kind of meticulous sharing, such a level of such egalitarianism, and vigilance, a lot of vigilance at play in making sure that things get properly shared, properly distributed. It's not, you know, flowery and passive. It doesn't just happen because people want to share. You know, they're forced to by one another. And you know, you can see that if you, whatever it is that you happen to have available to hand out, and looking at the literature as well on the Juntois, you see the same kind of thing, that it's where you come into the gendered rituals, that there's this sharp distinction created, you know, and where you do get a kind of drawing back into coalitions. And it's as, yeah, I mean, really what's happening is, what seems to be happening is that what I said earlier about the fact that you're using the possibility of duality, you're using the possibility of difference, and the fact that in that there is also the possibility of, you know, patriarchy. There's also the possibility of breakdown, using it creatively in order to generate power and to highlight the fact that, you know, we're working together, bringing this out into the public domain, making it visible, making it active, so that we can kind of collectively keep an eye on it. And I remember when I came across a statement that James Woodburn made about gender egalitarianism in these kinds of societies. He was referring to it as though in ritual time, you had this strong antagonism between the sexes. And it seemed almost as though the conclusion was that this was something that they hadn't yet managed to fully eradicate. You know, this intersexual tension, the conflict almost that's brought out in ritual. But in fact, it's there for a reason. It's functional. To have that kind of pitting yourselves against each other sexually and collectively. It's not that people haven't found a way to you know, level it or to address it. It's that it's being used creatively to almost like to produce fuel. So I think you have a really interesting twist. I'm sure Jerome would have a lot more to say about this.
I just wanted to say before Jerome comes in, it's just when Bruce Parry and Jerome did the filming of Ngoku, it was just so beautifully clear that the women's Ngoku was a matriarchal sort of seizure, joyful, funny, rival seizure of power. It's so clear in that, in the statements and the little clips we had in that video, which we can access very easily, that the women wanted to sort of surrender, knowing that the men are going to do their ajengi before too long, but also kind of, as you say, Morna, it's almost as if the women want a bit of a provocation from the men, like some sort of taste of threat to women's solidarity, in order to once again mobilize their power. In other words, you need both. You need the ajengi in order to motivate Ngoku, and you need Ngoku to motivate ajengi. And it's, as you say, a pendulum. But that element of conflict is is actually the engine of it all. I mean, without that, if this sort, and Jerome has beautifully written about all this as well. Just sameness. What's the good of sameness? I mean, everyone's the same. I mean, that's death. If everyone's the same, there's no energy anyway. Nothing's going to happen. If everything's just everyone's equal, you need some kind of conflict and resolution of conflict, and then re-emergence of conflict, and then new resolution. And of course, as you know, I think, and I think a lot of us agree with this, that the moon is the clock that does that. The moon waxes and it wanes, and it produces that. It's the clock for that pendulum, or rather, the pendulum is the moon's. Every clock clock needs a kind of pendulum to keep it going, and it's the moon, or has been for hundreds of thousands of years. The moon's the clock we evolved with, and it's part of our bodies. Most obviously with women. But yeah, conflict is needed. Hegel wrote about all that. Without conflict, there's no life.
Yeah. Also Bakhtin, he says it's in that constant kind of cycling, that dialogue against one another, that people. He says it beautifully. I can't remember the words, but that's where we become who we are. It's not something to get rid of. It's the point. It's the whole point. That you're using that constant kind of like that coming together to become something else, something bigger.
I mean, just to come back on the point about what Woodburn said, I think it's quite revealing, and it's to do with the differences between the so-called immediate return hunter-gatherers that we know around the world. And the case of the Bayaka is actually quite unusual. In many situations, what has happened is that inequality has taken root. Patriarchy has installed itself. And one of the things that James was trying to understand was what were the main pathways for that to happen. And so he looked around and he saw that the Australian Aborigines actually offer a really remarkable model, because they have a day-to-day life which is radically egalitarian, where all the food collected is shared. It's very difficult for anybody to gain advantage through controlling other people's access to vital resources like food or land or water. Yet they have, not everywhere, and it varies to some extent, but pretty uniformly, a very patriarchal system which favors the interest of elderly men over the interests of young men and women. And the main avenue through which those men achieved that process is religious, it's ritual. And that's why James thought that the conflict between men and women was one which could lead to inequality between them if manipulated in the right way by either party. And in the Australian case, what the elder men did is they controlled the access of younger men to wives. And they did that through requiring young men to achieve a certain level of initiation before they could marry. And this put the old men in a very powerful position in relation to those young men, being able to make all sorts of demands on their labor in order for those young men to get initiated. And then from that, control of the women, because the elder men tended to marry more than one woman. So anyway, there's an ideological system which enables patriarchy to come into an egalitarian system and impose inequality in the political sphere and religious sphere without it being imposed in the economic sphere. Now, the interesting case in the Hadza case, one thing that James saw happening over the period of time that he visited them was that men became more and more sort of violent in their epime responses to women. And he was wondering in his own mind if that was some sort of precursor to them having the opportunity, if situation conditions change, to beginning to impose more authority, political control over women. It hasn't happened as far as we know, but it was something that he considered. And there was a very interesting paper by a Japanese researcher who had worked in the eastern part of the Mbenje region, so about 50 miles to the east of where Morna was working. And he began his fieldwork in the 1970s, and just at the recent Chags in Malaysia, he gave a paper in the panel on Ijengi and the changes that he'd noticed in Ijengi over the period of time in which he's been observing it. And what he'd seen since the arrival of logging and market economies, really penetrating into the forest, was that men were becoming more and more aggressive in their imposing of certain restrictions on women and the uninitiated during Ijengi. And he was quite shocked by this. And those were the sorts of observations. I mean, I've been going back for whatever, almost 30 years, but over 50 years, you can really see those changes. And it was very interesting to hear his reflections on that. So there is something about the fragility of these ritual systems, and it's the cooperation, the collective will of the women in Benjeli society that really seems to hold this together. And that is, there's a whole sort of hidden side of Ngoku which goes on as well, which is very important in developing that solidarity. And the solidarity is very robust, and maybe what the Hadza women have managed to hold on to as well. Through their ritual practice, and it is a vulnerable constellation. These things, people sort of imagine egalitarianism is somehow simple or easy, and I think what the people like the Benjeli show us is just how much energy and effort and sophisticated understanding of human nature and human relations and the relations between bodies and the sort of chemistry of good living, how to maintain that and keep that in operation. And it's a very great achievement.
You told us, Jerome and Ingrid, that there was a moment, I think a couple of years ago or 3 years ago, when the women felt a bit intimidated in one of the areas where you're most familiar with, and they stopped doing Ngoku for a whole period. And as I understand it, Ingrid was quite upset about this. And then partly through Ingrid, I'm sure it may have happened anyway, Ngoku got reinstated, and it was a huge relief that once again the women can do Ngoku, because it have actually, Catherine Townsend has written as well about how once the women's counterpart in Ijengi gets abandoned and the women don't do it anymore, then who knows what will happen, how much everything will be skewed over in favor of a patriarchy, which obviously the logging situation and so on hugely.
It's also an issue for the Hadza because, well, for one thing, we're not sure that even Epeme, which is kind of the balance between the sexes ritual, carries on. But the women's ritual, Maitoko, is becoming increasingly rare, and in different parts of Hadza country isn't there at all. And that is their counterpart that holds the balance with Epeme. So when James was talking in that way about Epeme, he was kind of leaving the Maitoko out of the count, because they do work against each other in the sort of ways that, or they have in the past worked against each other in the sort of ways that Morna's talking about. So it kind of goes to show that principle of creating solidarity against the other sex is what is the power, as Morna suggests. I just wanted to put in that from a kind of evolutionary perspective, the evolutionary psychologists and anthropologists who want to explain morality have made the argument that, yes, the only thing that can give groups morality is solidarity against other groups. But what they mean is warfare, actual warfare. So they're not even thinking about women, they're thinking about men having wars with each other. That is what creates laws and rules amongst the different groups, which of course is completely ludicrous. As soon as you think of something like sexual morality, how does that ever come out of a situation of warfare? Well, the only kind of warfare that can possibly lead to sexual morality is one between the genders that's operating in this moving pendulum of resistance.
Which is a kind of battle of the sexes, but obviously at the end of the day is playful. It's not warfare. Women, when they laugh at the men, they want the guy that they're laughing at to join in and see himself as others see him and join the human race. It's a very generous form of warfare, if you like. it's but yeah, perhaps people on this panel should just know that there's if you like, the major alternative theory about the origins of morality to the one
theory. I mean, our theory doesn't come into it much. It's the major theory, isn't it?
Well, it's the overwhelming. If you're interested in like looking at academic anthropology, evolutionary anthropology, how did morality emerge? How did we get rules about sex and various other things? How did moral systems work? The dominant paradigm is warfare between men. It just makes
execution squads.
Or execution squads. It makes absolutely no sense. But then I'm afraid that is the dominant theory.
Well, it's what's tragic about it is it panders to these sort of American ideals of macho men making history, and it's just bullshit. If you look at the ethnography, there's no evidence whatsoever for these sorts of hunter-gatherers to get involved in warfare. I mean, you occasionally get a group of men who might be so outraged by the behavior of somebody that they take violent action, and it may lead to that person's death. And certainly in the area where I work, a couple of people have been murdered in that way. But it's very much a spontaneous rage reaction as opposed to a calculated mission, sort of command and control type organization that leads to a successful capturing or whatever it is of somebody else. And what really, and this is what Chris and I have been developing in that Wild Voices stuff, is that of course the opponent is not other people, it's these really scary big cats that roam around in the places where people evolved, and those are a very intimidating, frightening opposition, and they eat you. They really don't mess around, and that is sufficient to explain the emergence of a normative order, a set of agreements that people hold between themselves. That is morality, fundamentally.
So we co-evolved with these big cats. The big cats are lunar. They are lunar. They have fantastic night vision, and they're rather lazy, and they prefer to eat you when you can't see what is eating you, which they can do when it's dark. And that happens through the night when the moon is dark. And it's been perfectly well worked out. Craig Packer and others have done lots of statistics about it. So as we co-evolved with the lions, and they were particularly dangerous when there was no moon in the sky during the night, clearly the seeking safety in numbers, the polyphonic singing, the solidarity against the lions would have had a pulse. And that pulse would have been a lunar one. Every dark moon, it was very important that you sing for your lives. And as Morna was saying, when you hear that polyphonic singing, it sounds like 30, 40 people. Perhaps it is 30, 40 people, but even if it's only 6 or 7 people, the lions would really, as Jerome points out, the lions don't really like taking risks. A lion that's got a bit wounded on one of its paws, it's a very serious thing. They don't want to mess with, a bunch of women and children singing like this. They're really well organized. So that relationship with lions is the key one. And as Jerome's saying, it was nothing like, warfare between territorial groups of men. That would not have led to any kind of morality, let alone sexual morality. How could warring groups of males, and part of the argument, by the way, I've read, is that these males, the reason for their warfare was to steal and rape each other's women. Well, is that how does what hunter-gatherers understand as sexual morality come from raping each other's women? I mean, it's completely absurd theory, but it doesn't stop it being dominant.
Yeah. Does anybody else want to come in with a point, or can we ask Morna to say something to wrap up? Or
Gabriella wants to say something.
Yeah.
I just wanted to just to come to the kind of point about the nocturnal. I love that thing you said, Morna, about the power continues through the nighttime, and there's always these strains of singing. And I'm just thinking now in our command and control society, we get very angry about people making noise at nighttime, but obviously in the world of kind of big cats roaming around, actually you really want those people to be noisy at night, and they're valuable people who are helping and bringing something to society. And I just wondered if you had any good examples of kind of nocturnal singing or behavior?
Well, I mean, other than what I was saying about hearing this going on constantly, you know, I mean, a lot of people say that they can't sleep whenever they're in a Bengeli camp for that reason. And Jerome is probably immune to it now because he'll have spent so much time there. But I just remember lying awake hour after hour thinking, oh, please go to sleep. And there was always somebody singing, talking, moving, you know, a bit of drumming, somebody else singing. And it seems, I mean, I don't know what Jerome would add to this, but it kind of felt to me tangible. It felt like there was this very clear use of sound. I looked at it from the perspective of women, and the fact that you know, keeping the song going, keeping the buzz alive, not allowing things to shut down for too long, meant that you also kept something open socially and in terms of a living space. But yet it makes total sense to do with predators and, you know, keeping the camp safe as well. The fact that you would always have this kind of buzz going. But if you think about what that does for a group of people, I was thinking about what Jerome said about the fact that there's this savoring of contact, and the fact that there is this constant generation of sound, music. I mean, if I think about myself in my house, you know, with all this stuff around me and the walls and the doors and the locks and the keys, and there is a real sense of, we're talking now about isolation, you know, social distancing and self-isolating. We've been self-isolating for about, I don't know, 4,000 or 5,000 years, slowly getting more and more entrenched into the isolated mind, the isolated body. And what you see with people like the Bengeli or the Juntois is what happens when you don't self-isolate, you know. Like Jerome says, whenever you manage, women are able to stay strong ritually, to stay, you know, to keep that strong, amplified collective signal going. Yeah, that will have effects on so many levels in terms of the ecology, in terms of safety from predators, but politically, in terms of what women manage to hold, it has huge repercussions.
Camilla, before we close, can I just make an announcement? Katrin wanted me to make an announcement.
Okay.
It's about the book club.
Okay.
So next, not this coming Thursday, next Thursday, between 5 and 6, I believe, Katrin, who's the organizer of the Radical Anthropology Group's New York chapter, is organizing a book club reading my book, Blood Relations. And
where's your book? Show it. Have you got it?
Oh, well, I mean, I'd have to get up and move around.
Don't get up.
So,
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I could get a copy, but anyway. So we're okay. Well done, Camilla. That's it. That's Chris Knight, Blood Relations. Okay, so we're going to do the introduction, and Katrin was really told me, Chris, don't forget. I've got to remember to announce it. So there you are. It's been announced.
Excellent. Yeah, and we're going to do that on. We're trying to do that one on Jitsi, right, with a very simple login on Jitsi with Blood Relations Book Club.
That's
so
right. Okay, just explain. There's an incredibly simple alternative to Zoom. It's called Jitsi Meet, JITSI Meet, and you don't need any IDs or codes or passwords. You just say Blood Relations Book Club, and as long as you're there doing it at the right time, it magically all comes together. It's a much simpler system than Zoom, and if it is better in other ways, technically, RAG might switch over to Jitsi because it's more secure, for example. Apparently, I'm told that, well, we've got a session on spies. We've got Felix Padel doing the anthropology of the intelligence agencies. But I'm told that as we're doing Zoom now, we are being projected on the wall at GCHQ. I mean, Zoom is completely open to the intelligence agencies. I'm not particularly worried about it this evening, but I mean, it's a bit of a joke. But anyway, that's the book club. So, Camilla, what's happening now? Are we having a pint in the virtual pub, or are we going to close after thanking Morna?
I'm going to close.
We've gone.
I think the virtual pub would be very unsatisfying, wouldn't it?
It would really. I have got lots of whiskey here, but
we'd like to buy you a pint, Morna. How do we do that?
Yeah, you know, I'm looking forward to being able to actually
it's a real whiskey.
Do that in person.
A real Guinness, yes. Okay, yeah.
We'll do that.
So, is everyone agreed? Are we going to close the whole thing? And I think it's been I've had a few texts down here in the chat saying absolutely brilliant. Going to definitely come along next week. So next week is Jerome and Kofi Klue, and they're going to be doing a talk, which is I mean, what do we say, Jerome? It's kind of about Extinction Rebellion, but it's about how we start the revolution, I suppose you could say, but with the understanding that any revolution worth anything is going to not come from academics over this part of the world. It's going to come from the global south and led by indigenous people, the kind of people we've been talking about today. So I think that's the topic. Am I right, Jerome, for next week?
I'm not sure that's exactly how it's phrased, but I'm sure we'll end up covering those.
I think we put your.
You've cut out, sorry.
Yep.
Well, anyway, I mean, it's certainly, I mean, one of the things I was planning on talking about was just the debt that we academics owe the indigenous people of the eastern woodlands of North America for the grilling that they gave the Jesuit priests in the 16th, 17th century, which provoked such a radical rethink of the values of Western European society that it provoked the Age of Reason. And that really was quite a remarkable feat that is completely ignored. And it's worth just reminding people of the importance of that contribution. And then I'm sure Kofi will have a lot to talk about revolutions and the stuff that he likes.
So, brilliant, Morna. I don't know, Camilla, do you want to say anything more?
We'll try and, well, just about the book club, there is a Facebook on RAG for the book club, but other people who aren't on Facebook, I'll try and mail out information about that. Otherwise, just say thank you so much to Morna. We're getting lots of comments from everybody who's been just really found it an amazing discussion. Even if people were just listening, they were still really interested in it. And so, yeah, so we always are. Thank you so much.
Me too. Thank you everyone. It's amazing that actually you can kind of make having criticized technology all evening, that you can make the connection this way. And I'm really glad that I was able to do it. See you all.
People from quite far around the world. Okay.
Yeah, I'll see you next week. I'm gonna tune into Jerome's next week as well. So
great.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.